Hello, I'm Brad.
And I'm Jason.
You are listening to
Dice in my mind.
Well, after 1 week going solo, I can say with great seriousness that it's good to have you back, Jason, to
Thank you,
be a
sir.
partner on the intro and outro. It wasn't difficult to do, but when I realized I was talking to myself, I had to re-record it again because there would be these grand pauses when I was waiting for a snarky response and didn't get it. So I'm surprised if we'll get maybe 5 or 7 downloads this week. Or
Well,
I
I
wish we
think we
had.
will.
I wish we had a heat map. I do this with some of the software that I work with at my company.
Oh, yeah.
You can heat map where people listen to
You
a
know,
specific recording.
Podbean indicates kind of aggregate data by country. But yeah, it would be interesting to have a heat map and actually see where people are.
Yeah,
Yeah,
to see how long
right.
it goes. But that's here nor there. That's
Like
kind
maybe
of
we're
outside
really
of
popular in Rhode Island. Who knows?
Well, I'm just talking about heat map within the actual audio where you can actually see how many people have listened or watched a recording at a certain point. So if you're recording a
Oh,
video for school, for example,
okay.
you can see a heat map and see that it goes dark toward the end, and that tells you
Oh,
that no one's
interesting.
listening to the end of it.
Okay.
So we do that with screen recordings, and it would
Yes.
be interesting to see podcast recordings to see how many of the 5 of you out there who listen to us actually get to the end of the podcast, or if you're air quote telling us you listen to it, but you really just hit the subscribe button out of pity.
And you know what? We immensely appreciate that too.
That's a good point. Yeah.
We let's not split hairs. We don't care if you don't listen till the end, although you ought to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where we give away the prizes and everything like that. That's how
Right.
Jim Johnson found out he's getting his Dyson Line
Smoking
smoking
jacket.
jacket.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah. So, well, tonight, now that you're back, it's actually I'm glad you are. Like I said before, and it's a great night to be back because
Oh
um,
yeah.
we get to talk again with friend of the podcast, Shelly Mazzanoble, and she is bringing Greg Tito along,
Who's that?
and I guess they run a podcast.
I've heard of it. I've heard of
Yeah,
it. For some game.
yeah. For
Right.
it's called Dragon Talk, and it is obviously the podcast of Dungeons and Dragons,
The official podcast of
the
Dungeons and
official
Dragons.
podcast. Yep.
Mhm.
Sorry, I was going to say official, and then my brain skipped. And they have come out with a book, or the book will be released shortly from the time we've recording this.
Yep.
Welcome to Dragon Talk, inspiring conversations about Dungeons and Dragons and the people who love to play it.
Yeah.
And we were lucky
Very.
in for us to get a draft PDF so we could actually read it and review it.
Well, not even draft. We got advanced PDF copies, as you will.
Yeah.
Yep. And it's a good looking, well written, truly interesting book.
As I was reading, I should maybe talk about this after, but it's stuck in my head is that I guess I didn't know this or I didn't remember it, but in one of the essays from that Greg did, they talked about how they'd have these little get-togethers about gaming, and Gary Gygax called them the Geneva Convention.
Oh, interesting.
And that's where Gen Con came from.
Yes.
I don't know if I knew that at one point, and my brain fails me.
I'm sorry. I skipped ahead on that one. Okay, no, sorry, I didn't take the next connection there. That is interesting.
Yeah, I didn't. I wish I would have pulled it up and had that. It was a footnote, and you'll hear them talk about their footnotes during the interview. And I'll be honest with you, after I read through this, I went back just to read the footnotes after we interviewed, just because they talk about them, and I'm like, okay, I gotta reread just those on its own.
Yep.
Because and they're neat and they're humorous, and just for that alone, it's rereadable material. And the fact is that you'll hear about this more. It's essays within the book. Some folks like Dr. Megan Connell, we've had on the show.
Yep, that's right.
So some folks who, if you haven't seen it, you'll recognize some of the names just based off of the show. A lot of you who are D&D fans, D&D players, or read D&D material will recognize some of the names. We'll wait until after the interview and talk about that.
Yep.
But great conversation with them. We are both really appreciative, considering the work they do during the day, the time they spend on their podcast, the time they spend with.
They've been making the rounds for all kinds of podcasts, advertising, and talking about this book, and it was just really, really thoughtful of them to spend a little time with us and do the same. And you'll all hear that because they're both clearly so excited about the book. And case in point, one of the questions we asked, and you'll hear shortly, is essentially how they whittled down their. Oh man, they're not that far away from 400 episodes of the podcast. How did they whittle down so relatively few interviews for the book? And we'll get into that with them, right? This is very much a discussion of what was the genesis of the book, why are they doing this, what do they want to happen because of it, and importantly, so I don't forget, and we'll say this again later, the book has a publication date scheduled for December 5th of this year, just in time for your holiday shopping. So again, Brad and I we've seen the book digitally, and it's just lovely. It is going to be such a neat winter read. Really strongly encourage everyone to pre-order it.
Before we go, I found it because this was a great footnote. And just depending off of that, two things. One, as part of a treasure hunt, when you listen, find the part of the discussion that really caught Jason's attention, and you'll know it based off of his discussion and questioning, and then we'll review that at the end.
Very good. Yes.
And two, I'm just going to read this little footnote. I'm going to give it away. So Greg wrote this, is one of the essays. I'm not going to give much away, but he talks about the original conventions they would have, and he calls it was called the Lake Geneva Wargaming Convention, named after its location here in our home state, where I still live, in Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. But gamers referred to it as the Geneva Convention, which was a reference to treaties governing the rules of, obviously, international warfare signed after World War II. Rules of war. It became, anyways, the nickname stuck and was eventually shortened to Gen Con. And I don't think I knew that before.
Obviously, Gen Con was named after Geneva, like Lake Geneva, but I had no idea until right now that it was a play on the Geneva Convention.
Yeah. So just it is not a book of it is a book of essays, but there is a humor to it. There's great depth to it. I found it to be a really good read, and even with us having PDF copies, I ordered a hard copy.
Because we like to read on paper. There's just something about
you
it.
And I both are. We were just talking about this for future episodes.
Yep.
When we start doing some of the stuff we're going to be doing on here, we want people to hear us pen to paper.
That's right.
There's just something about that for both of us that is appealing versus being on a computer all the time.
You got it. All right. With that, we are very pleased to welcome back Shelly, Mazzanoble, and to welcome for the first time, hopefully not the last, Greg Tito, as we jump into their book all about Dragon Talk.
So I was just talking before we hit record here a minute ago that it's probably been almost 11 months to the day
really close.
That we had Shelly on with us, and was one of our first interviews. It was episode 25. Aww. And she won't admit it, but she said that I reminded her of a Stranger Things character. And I won't go into the details other than the fact that due to that maybe 10-second comment, there has been 11 months of ridicule by Jason for it.
True, all true.
So 10 seconds for 11 months.
And now having the two of you here, I mean, it boggles the imagination of what's about to happen.
Yeah,
and you wonder why I won't admit it, that I remember ruining your life for
it just ruins about an hour or two a week when we record, and then about another 6 hours when we're on the phone talking about everything else. So, hey, Greg and Shelly, thank you for taking the time with us today.
No problem. I'm excited.
Thank you.
You know, obviously, if you are in any way online, which you are because you're listening to us, and play or know about D&D.
Yeah, you know anything about
who
D&D.
You are.
Yep.
Yeah. Or like us, think we know a lot about it, but when we play, realize how much we don't. No. But really, the big reason, just because we like Shelly so much and she was willing to come back, but and she dragged Greg with her. But you have a book coming out, and we wanted to talk obviously anything and everything. You know, people listen, and Shelly knows this is organic. We kind of go anywhere and everywhere, but we really wanted to talk about. You both have a book coming out here over the next few months. So I don't care who goes first, but talk about what precipitated you writing this, and then what is coming.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give the quick overview of the book, and then Shelly can talk about where it came from.
Great.
Because it really did come from you, Shelly. But this is called Welcome to Dragon Talk.
Yeah.
Inspiring conversations about Dungeons and Dragons and the people who love to play it. So that means it's about you, both of you, and everyone listening at home. This was a amazing investigation for us to go back to all the episodes that we have had over the 7 years we've been working together at Wizards of the Coast on the official Dungeons and Dragons podcast. We eventually called it Dragon Talk. And all the breadth of the people that we have interviewed, from Hollywood entertainers to streamers to other podcasters to politicians and educators and actors and all the various folks in between who just love Dungeons and Dragons. That was been the only through line. And it's such this wonderful mix of stories, from trying to find out who people are to the things that they create and are inspired by Dungeons and Dragons, and hopefully try to bring more people into this community, because that has been Shelly and I's goal from the beginning, is to lift up the voices that make up this wonderful group of folks who love to roll dice and pretend to be elves and dwarves and fighters and sorcerers, and understand that it's more, you can't even really encapsulate what the game is in a few pithy sentences like I tried to do in the opening of this book. It's very hard to do. And so I think this is our best attempt at trying to explain to people what Dungeons and Dragons is in, 200 pages. That's the book. But it all came from Shelly.
Not entirely, but it all came from a single email in March of 2020. Yes, actually, it was an email from an editor at the University of Iowa Press.
Yeah.
And sort of incredulously, she wrote to me and said, "Hey, I've read your previous books that were about D&D, and I listened to Dragon Talk, and I think there could be a book here. Would you be interested in writing about the making of a podcast and the D&D community, and your experiences with that?" And I read the email, and then I just closed my Outlook and just didn't write back to her for a couple of weeks, because I was like, that's spammy. That's not true. An editor wouldn't just reach out and be like, hey, book. But then I went back to it, because I didn't delete her. I didn't put her in my spam, but I just was like, probably not real. But then I went back to the email, and then I Googled her. I'm like, she's a real person. She is who she says she is. Went back through the University of Iowa catalog, and they did have a lot of geeky focus books. And she did say they were trying to expand that list. Like, okay, I'm going to write her back. And so we just went back and forth a little, and I liked her idea, but I didn't think that the making of a podcast could be an entire book. And really, if there's anything that to talk about with Dragon Talk, obviously, like Greg, has things to say too. Like this entire podcast wouldn't really exist without Greg. Greg was the one that made it a real podcast. Like he was the, as we talk about in the book too, because we do go into Dragon Talk's origin story, but Greg was the one that was like, we should actually name this thing. And hey, maybe we should schedule episodes on a weekly basis instead of just like, feel like doing a podcast today? Okay. When do you think you can get that out, Bart? Oh, I don't know. Tuesday. Okay. You know, we were pretty loosey-goosey with the whole thing.
Yeah.
And it was really Greg's vision for how we should be reaching out to people in the community before we were kind of like, let's talk to people around the building that make D&D. Right. Or like if somebody was local to Seattle, we could get them to come to the office and record. But we didn't really expand much beyond that. So it was like, obviously, this is something I want to do with Greg. And so Greg and I worked up a proposal that is essentially the book that hopefully you'll all be reading December 5th. But we really, like Greg said, wanted to focus on the community, on the people that actually make this game and this community so special. And we're very lucky that every week we get to talk to these amazing creators that are out there making maps, making board games, doing amazing cosplay, or people who are doing something completely different outside of the hobby, but they say, hey, I got here because Dungeons and Dragons was such an important part of my life, because I'm now a director, or I'm now a storyteller through animation, or you know, because I played D&D, and because it really, I learned how to do world building. I learned character development. Now I'm an excellent showrunner on a very popular TV show because I'm also a really great dungeon master. And guess what? There's a lot of crossover between those two roles. So that was the book that we really wanted to write. That these are the stories that we really wanted to tell. It was really hard to pare down, about at the time we were writing this, 5 to 6 years of a podcast into about 30 essays. But Greg and I came up with our list of the interviewees, or the people that we really wanted to talk about that were very impactful to us on a personal level, and compared our lists. Thankfully, there was only like maybe 1 or 2 crossovers, but it was really cool actually to see that there was the people that Greg had selected. Because I didn't realize sometimes why Greg was so impacted by a story that someone told, or why he had a special connection to a person, until I read his essay. So it was very cool to like rediscover the podcast and all these interviews through the eyes of Greg as well. I know. It was really cool.
I mean, that it's so interesting. It's so to a few of your points, you all were good enough to get us digital copies into our digital hands so we could look through this. And we were talking before we recorded about just how interesting it was. And as Brad said, I think that's a really positive thing. And so many things jump out about it. But just in response to what you both just said, and especially you, Shelly, 3 things really stood out to me like right away. One is just the fact that Welcome to Dragon Talk, the book, is being published by a university press. I think that's beyond cool. And I think it's interesting because it's not just going to be a, quote, popular book, although obviously we hope it sells like crazy. But because it's coming out with the U of Iowa Press, it enters the pop culture studies lexicon. So, you know, I mean, people will do research that is inspired by this book. Like this is a thing. And that's just so neat because you know, D&D and RPGs in general have kind of only scratched the surface, and that's just another aspect of humanity and learning and exploration that hasn't gone very far. And I just thought that was really cool. Like when I saw that the book was coming out, and then we got the PDF, I was like, I wonder who the publisher is. And then you see this university press, and it's like, well, that's unexpected, and that opens up hopefully just a whole new world of future books from you and others, right, who want to do that. Another thing that really stood out to me is, and you hinted at this, Shelly, your chapters back and forth in terms of writing between the two of you. Normally, you know, when people co-author, you're just writing together, right? You might be splitting the load, but that was really interesting because then we get your voices in each. Right. And then there's just the third thing is just the sheer diversity of voices. Like, I mean, there's nothing narrow or linear about these people, about these stories. They're just all over the place in the best way.
Yeah. I think that was, I don't think we really thought about that when we were doing the proposal for this, but I loved once we finally got to see some of the chapters that we were reading, that it was like, oh, it actually feels like a podcast. It actually feels like I'm bringing my sensibilities to it, my storytelling to an interview, and then we get to hear Shelly's and her aspects and what she found interesting about a certain guest. To a point, we've talked about this a couple of times, but we used to have a lot more footnotes in there than is currently in there. And we use those as jokes in between from each other, as if, I was hearing Shelly talking on the podcast and I would think of a joke that would respond to something she wrote and put in there. Some of those are still in there, but there was a lot more to start with, because we just started cracking each other up on things that I knew that Shelly would laugh at if I put a footnote in about. Which also felt very podcast-like.
A little too insider joke, I guess.
Well, and I mean, to that point, though, I'm impressed at how quickly you guys got this out. I mean, if you started this process in 2020 and it's going to publication at the end of 2022, that's fast. I don't know how you guys did that, especially because how many episodes have you had of Dragon Talk now?
Almost in like the high 300s, I think.
Right. And every one of those, you talk to multiple people. I mean, I don't even know how you got through. Like, how did you make that decision process early on and narrow it so quickly? I mean, that's kind of an impressive feat.
Yeah, that was the easy part.
Wow.
Almost. The writing was the harder part.
Let me ask too. Oh, go ahead, Greg. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, I don't think we went and listened to all of our library and picked from there. I think we remembered ones. Like we had, I remember when we spoke to this person and that was really, really cool and it touched me in this way, and I think I can write about it with this angle. And then we would go back and re-listen to those interviews and then get more substance from it from there. But no, I think to your point, Jason, if we had listened to all of our backlog, that would have taken a much longer process. But luckily we had a few that we knew we wanted to touch on just from memory, and how much how much we continue to talk about them weeks afterwards.
You could kind of tell when you're both talking about this, kind of how oversimplification, the creative juices started going with this, and again, like Jason said, how quickly it as much as from the outside looking in, how quickly it came together. What does it mean now? And again, this is where I'm going to right turn and ask the question that should go at the end of the interview. How much did this kind of fuel your interest in potentially doing this again? Now, I know that this book hasn't come out yet, but in terms of doing something additional in the future. Really.
You mean as far as like looking back at some of the other interviews that we didn't select for doing essays?
It sounds to me like you were real positive about it. So have you thought about maybe continuing this, obviously beyond the podcast, and just additional writing or anything?
Oh, that's a cool idea. I don't know. Yeah, I think that would be really neat to take this concept and kind of expand it beyond just the people we have talked to, and talk through the different ways that D&D has, because it's something that we've always said, is that it's a discipline that has so many other artistic inputs into it, right? Like Dungeons and Dragons is not just a game. It's not just performance. It's not just writing and world building. It's not just, the group storytelling or the group interactions. It's all those things combined that make it what it is. And so, yeah, I would love to continue to talk through the different facets, and there's, thousands of more folks out there that we have yet to meet that might have more interesting, other interesting stories we could tell.
Well, we're interviewing you, but I'm going to tell a quick story, is that when we started getting back into gaming, which was what, Jason, about 7 years ago, maybe, there were just a handful, I want to say 2 or 3 things that when I said to Jason, we should get back into it. Jason likes to listen to podcasts. Even more than I did at that time. And one of them was yours.
Listen to a lot of Dragon Talk.
That spurred my and it spurred my interest back into D&D, which I played as a young kid, but then stopped in my early teens just because of everything else that was going on. So 2 middle-aged guys with a lot less podcast talent than you both have, started playing and then realizing, why not, why not have some people listen to our inane ramblings? And then we actually got people to sit and interview with us. Shelly, for example. And
all it takes is a couple suckers early on, and all of a sudden,
it just
falls
the
into
ball server.
place
No,
after
I don't want to make it sound like I'm being patronizing, but I really do believe that what you were doing spurred both of us, which it to be honest with you, I think a couple of years back before that would have seemed impossible, just wasn't on our radar. And I have to imagine this, and like Jason said, just the fact that it's, you know, it's coming out of a university press and showing how in many ways we're seeing this becoming mainstream in many ways will spur others' interest in doing it as well.
Yeah, because I mean, you guys have had some, you're always, you know, making light of things in this really positive way, but you've had some fairly serious topics or conversations on the podcast along the way, right? I mean, there are times when it's so much more than just gaming or just D&D, and yet it fits so well. And then you look at the book chapters. There's a chapter early in the book, and the title begins, "Do you even lift, bro?" And on like my first scroll through that, before I had a chance to sit down with it, I saw that. I'm like, oh, this is not a typical D&D book where it's just a bunch of geekery, right? This is I mean, there's some serious stuff in these chapters, and I think that goes to, I think that's what you're saying, Brad, and I think that goes to your point about why you even wrote this book. I mean, there are so many connections, and there's so much benefit to be derived from these kinds of interactions, be they around the table, real, digital, reading a book about it, listening to a podcast about it with you guys. It's kind of a remarkable thing. And then to be picked up by a press like that, where it can go out and people are going to read it and take it really seriously. That's pretty darn cool.
Yeah.
That's been our kind of underlying premise for the podcast to begin with. It's always like, I think when we started doing it in earnest in 2015, when I started at Wizards, there was still the old idea of, if someone plays Dungeons and Dragons, they are a certain type of way, right? And that was just, you know, throughout all my childhood growing up, it was always looked down upon. And I think our, just like, as you said, like subtle positivity, and also like, you know, smirking positivity, because you know, we understand that there is, you know, we're self-deprecating enough to keep that kind of thing going, but it has always been about showing that you can be a D&D fan and also love musicals. You can be a D&D fan and also be a doctor who has, you know, wanting to get out the idea that talking about suicide is something that should not be stigmatized in our world, and you can have all of these facets of your life, and all of them have come together. It doesn't have to be if you're a D&D fan, you are X. Like, we wanted to show that entire breadth, and that has been something that, and you're right, I didn't even think about that, but once this book comes out and is seen by more people, it will just continue that effect even more and more. Steamroll. Snowball, that's what it's not.
Yeah, and with a broader audience.
Snowball effect.
Yeah.
I was thinking of steamroller, where you roll over on your friend.
We don't want to steamroll people.
I haven't thought about that in a while.
We're audio only, so the listeners can't see that Greg is like animating this as he's explaining.
I was moving back and forth like I was steamrolling you all.
Now I'm just thinking how I'm going to implement it, I'm going to try that sometime tonight.
I don't know. That must have been a
just
dude
not
thing.
with the Chihuahua. Just not with the
must
Chihuahua.
Have been a dude thing. You know what is happening?
That wasn't my friends and I didn't steamroll.
I think, you know, Shelly, we all talked about this the first time you were on almost a year ago, but if I've learned anything as a father of girls, it's that a lot of things I thought were normative, they're just dude things. Just all
it really is.
There's a lot of things.
Try as we might to not be biased, but
steamrolling, we now know.
Steamrolling.
You know.
Dude thing. Yep.
Dutch ovens. Dude thing.
Interesting. Now where I thought this was going to
My wife knew about it, but she had older brothers, so I think that was part of it.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
okay. She'd been inoculated. So I'm and if either or both of you are comfortable divulging this, I'm curious if, looking at the chapters in the book, right, and the stories that you each recount from the interviews, are there any that, if just from that curated list, that really stand out to you or stood out to you while you were writing, either because of the impact like that had on you, or maybe some of them were just especially difficult or glorious to write for some reason. I'm just kind of curious what for you stands out from among that short list.
Greg, you want to go?
No, I was nodding
Oh,
to you.
okay.
Go ahead, you go first.
I have a type for sure. So I think one of the first ones I wrote was the one with Ethan Schoonover, who's the middle school teacher. He was teaching at Lake Washington Middle School for girls. I got the name wrong, but it's somewhere just in Seattle. Yeah. It's a middle school for girls, as the name would imply. And they had a very robust D&D club at that middle school. Yeah, all girls. And I love that story so much. I love how excited these middle school girls got to be playing D&D. It's a small enough school where it ended up being like a third of the school was in this club. Wow. These girls became dungeon masters. Once they left middle school, they went off to high school to start D&D clubs at high schools. Wow. There's a conversation that he recounted to us that I wrote about where one of the 8th graders upon graduation was, getting a pep talk from some of the other girls, and she, about starting a D&D club. And they were like, it's okay. Like, you're going to have to let boys in your club. Like, they're going to have to, like, it's high school, man. Like, there's going to be boys there. And they're like, oh, I know. But they just had such a different middle school experience than most of us girls had. And I love the idea of these friendships that they formed. Yes. In that, kind of difficult time of a girl's life, but they're out there slaying monsters together and they're bonding together. And these are going to be things that they're going to take with them for the rest of their lives. Like, they were empowered by playing Dungeons and Dragons at a very formative time in their life. And that will always stay with me, that type of thing. Anything that has to do with kids playing Dungeons and Dragons just gets me very, very excited. And we have a couple of stories. I probably brought this up maybe last year when we talked. You did. I know we talked a little bit about the girls and D&D. Dr. Megan Connell, she was also another one that came up. Definitely someone I wanted to write about because I find her incredibly inspiring. She also has a book coming out about
she's been on
and their
we've had, and she's wonderful.
She's so good, and she's done so much for especially young people using Dungeons and Dragons as part of her therapeutic practice, and really being kind of a pioneer in that field of role playing and therapy is not new. Dungeons and Dragons is new, and so she has new-ish. So she had seen a lot of success with running a group for, again, mostly teen girls, and the impact was extremely powerful on those girls. And Dungeons and Dragons really helped them in a way that, for reasons why they were in this therapeutic practice to begin with. They actually were learning and being empowered by Dungeons and Dragons, by our little game.
And this is what you guys
stuff that just blows me away.
Yeah, you talk about this stuff essentially every week.
That's just so above and beyond just entertainment, which it is, and it should be, and everybody should have fun when they're out there playing Dungeons and Dragons. I'm not saying like, if you haven't discovered something profound about yourself, you're playing it wrong. No. It is a game, and it is entertaining, and we do have a great time playing it. But there are profound impacts that it can make on people's lives. And I think even if you don't realize it happening, like if you're a 10-year-old kid and you're just loving Dungeons and Dragons, and like 20 years later, you're still a really avid reader, and you can actually write some really great emails, and you become a communications manager at a game company like Greg Tito. I don't know. Like, maybe, there's skills that were happening that you didn't even realize were happening, but Dungeons and Dragons helped get you there. So totally. I could go on, but Greg, I know you have several good ones as well.
Yeah, well, I've been, going through this list. I've been trying to make sure I highlight different ones when we're talking to different people. And I already mentioned the one with Michael Mallon, the DM. He also mentions a Stranger Things character pretty prominently in that episode. Thank you, Dusty Buns. But
I didn't say it.
But no, he mentions about his brother, his older brother, who is similar to the character Billy in season 2. Season 2 of Stranger Things had just come out when we had talked to him. Unfortunately, his older brother died by suicide, and they had this great time playing Dungeons and Dragons together as the older brother, and he was very formative and had this moment. And then he wanted to come on and he was very upfront. We were like, this is hard for us to talk about, and he's like, that's the point. Is like, we want to understand how we can discuss these things in a way that isn't just sweeping it under the rug. And he was very frank about how he, talked to his brother a few months before, and could tell that he was hurting, but didn't know how to broach the topic or do the right thing. And he is a doctor, a psychiatrist who does this for his living, and he could not help his brother battling in these demons. And I saw so much in that story, that I related to, that many in our community relate to. That was really important, and so I really wanted to highlight that, because it is one of those ones that doesn't feel quite so uplifting, but at the same time there's still a great message there, which is you get so much community just by rolling dice with the same group of people each week or every other week or whatever, however scheduling allows us to be able to get together and play. And so I thought that was really important. Then also I really love that we have built up a relationship and a rapport with Deborah Ann Wall over the course of the several years that we have been podcasting. She was someone who I loved in True Blood. Her character was one that both my wife and I really were amazed by, and how it had an entire arc throughout that vampire series. And when we were trying to figure out like people who we wanted to highlight playing Dungeons and Dragons publicly, that was concurrent with what Dungeons and Dragons what we were doing in Dragon Talk. Dungeons and Dragons also wanted to try to bring more live play with more recognizable names from people. So that's why we used sometimes Dragon Talk as a conduit to get to know people and invite them into our entertainment. And when her name was put forth, we're like, oh, but she would never do it. We heard maybe she likes Dungeons and Dragons, but we don't know if this will ever, manifest itself in being a reality. And then it was, and we were able to actually communicate with her, and she's just such a good proponent of everything that we've been saying about Dungeons and Dragons. She lives and breathes it, and we don't even have to do any prompting. She'll just be like, oh yeah, everything about Dungeons and Dragons is fantastic. I love it for the reasons. I routinely run it for new people that she meets in the entertainment industry, and she's got like a module in which she always kind of throws at new people that she's always ready to constantly proselytize about why this is so great. But then also she's an actress who there's ups and downs in that profession, and she was very frank about that and how it related to the joy that she felt with Dungeons and Dragons. I love that she was like, D&D brings me joy each time, and I don't know if I want to meld it with my professional life or not, and what that means. And I thought that was a really kind of interesting moment for her to speak very frankly with us about. So that was another one that I just really love. And to Shelly's point about having a type around helping kids, like I certainly have a type for performers, people who are bards or has some kind of theatery kid background, because that's such a big part of my life. Especially when I was younger, and how I got that camaraderie from drama school, less during my adolescence with Dungeons and Dragons than a lot of people do. I had that, and I went back to D&D after I had that. So it was really nice to always bring forth those people, because they're theater people. It just feels like we were able to kind of always communicate about something in a way that makes sense and get it. So. So many like Omega Jones is one that always comes to mind when we're talking about bards and theater and being a musical theater person, as well as the trials and tribulations of being who they are within both the musical theater as well as in the D&D community. And we're saying a lot of positive things about all of these people come together, but it hasn't always been positive for every single person. And how we deal with that is just like the growth of this community, I think, has improved because of that acknowledgement and the willing to see other people. Because the one analogy I always go back to is that a D&D group is made up of people from different backgrounds, different skills, different sensibilities. They might even have different morals if they're different alignments hanging out with each other. But we're all going for a common goal usually, unless you're playing some kind of awful evil party. Which we also talk about with Lauren Urban and how that fun that can be. But we're always trying to make the world a better place, and that comes through in the DNA of this book. I think
it's important, just because, and Jason and I have talked about this multiple times. I think we might have even mentioned it back, Shelly, when we talked to you originally. Is that this community is very different. It's in some ways a little bit I don't mean this to be negative, but insulated in some ways from the negativity that is so prevalent out there right now. You can't watch, I hate to say it, but you can't watch TV or the news without something potentially pounding you in a way that could bring you down. And anytime I listen to, and even when you, like you're saying, you're talking about tough subjects, there's a hope there, and a positivity there that, honestly, being from the outside, starting to look at, I didn't see before.
Yes,
and a potential,
it does provide them.
Yeah, it's a pathway. It's a mechanism, right? It's not just things can be better and good even in the moment, but here's literally how to do it. I'll give you a rule book, right? And just play and allow yourself to have fun. I gotta ask before, because we want to be mindful of your time. We know we're all busy, but without giving away.
Speak for yourself. I'm drinking after this, remember?
Oh, well,
he's got plenty of time.
I'm kidding.
During this.
No. This is not. I don't. No.
Brad's the consummate professional, right?
Yeah.
Oh, gotcha.
Right. He drinks between sessions. No. But seriously, totally derailed. Without giving away like actual people, looking at like the 400s of Dragon Talk in terms of the next couple of years coming up on the podcast, are there types of people, are there arenas where you'd like to have discussions where you just haven't gotten to yet?
That's a really good question.
Yeah, I don't know if there are groups, but I would say there are certain folks that we've always wanted to talk to.
Sure.
One of them is Stephen Colbert, as being a entertainer and a bard in his own right, and a lover of fantasy and D&D and Lord of the Rings. I would love to chat with him. I think he's got a busy schedule, I've heard. Taping, I mean, he does many more shows than the two of us, or the four of us do. So yeah, I would love to do that. And as well, we do talk to Steve Hobbs, who's the Secretary of State of Washington, and super D&D nerdy guy. Love talking to him, and I love that he is just as politician-y as you would expect someone who is a politician to be, while also being as D&D-y as he could possibly be. Like, I didn't really put those two in my brain, but he embodies it so well. I would love to talk to more politicians. I honestly do think that just in order to make the world a better place, I think more people playing D&D who are in the business of governing and trying to find compromise and collaboration. Honestly, D&D is just a great tool for doing that, and I wish more people in power did that. And so I'd love to talk to more, hopefully encourage more people in government to do that.
That's cool. How about you, Shelly? Are there arenas you're interested in, or?
I mean, I still get very excited and inspired by people who work with kids in D&D. So keep those coming. I am also very interested in just talking to people who are outside of the norm of what you think a D&D player looks like. I just am very excited about shining a light on the entire community and just making sure that people like me that maybe did not think there was a place for them in this hobby are so wrong, and that they can actually, see themselves in this community. So I love talking to people who are newly discovered of D&D. They are just full of excitement and enthusiasm for what this game has taught them or brought to them. I love those types of conversations. And I really like talking to dungeon masters. The How to Be a DM segment has been really inspiring to me. And just learning about how the different ways that people tell stories and how they bring people around the table together. It's really powerful.
That's really cool. Thank you so much, both of you, for spending time with us. Shelly, again, for putting up with us.
I know it's becoming an annual event now.
I think it is now an annual
count on
event.
it. I mean, no offense to any of the wonderful people who have wasted their time with us in this past year and a half, but you have remained. And Brad will tell you that this is true. You have remained one of our absolute favorite guests, and it's not just because you were willing so early in the process, but it was just such a delightful, joyful talk. Just like tonight.
I liked it too, and I was very excited to get to chat with you again. But yeah, that was
thank you.
Remains very close to my heart as well. That conversation.
And you got Greg to join us, and
we really appreciate that.
Yes, very persuasive when it comes to Greg. Got him to write a book with me. I got him to come on a podcast with me.
You're gonna steamroll over this guy really soon.
Yeah, right.
There it is.
Maybe I am a steamroller.
You're a
virtual
steamroller.
You're a steamroller. That's right.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
much of this
instead of a Rick roll, it's a steam roll.
Yes, the Rick roll I can do.
Now I have a picture of Dustin doing the Rick roll, and he looks oddly like Brad. On that note, we should probably close. Yeah, he's covering his camera.
Sorry.
I'm not. You have a year to prepare.
In all fun, it was really a pleasure to have both of you on. I'm not like Jason. I'm willing to read anything that's put in front of me. That's rated PG or better. And I found it fascinating, and I still am going to pick up the print version just because I love having the printed word in front of me. Story for another day. So awesome. I would recommend everyone and even if you're not necessarily a gamer and for some reason you actually listen to us, go check out Dragon Talk on the podcast, and keep an eye out. When's the book coming out again? Shelly, you mentioned it earlier.
December 5th, but we have it on good authority that if you do pre-order it from University of Iowa Press's website, you could get it early. I think from anywhere, if you pre-order it, you might get it early. So
that's very good news.
Test out that theory, see what happens.
We will. We will.
Thank you both.
Thank you very much.
We really appreciate it. I love being able to talk about this in D&D, and of course I hope, Brad, you'll be able to sing us out the never-ending story.
I don't sing, but I have my horn and my guitar here. If you're willing to endure it, I'm willing to do it.
Part of my soul.
I'll leave that for your outro.
Yeah, there it is. Thanks, guys.
Your solo outro, we'll do that. We really appreciate it.
That was as cool as I expected it to be.
It really was.
And obviously both of us having our listeners to the podcast, it was taking that podcast and carrying it as visitors to other podcasts, I think is really cool to keep that vibe. And I really felt like we can't carry a torch to that, but we could feel that vibe when we were talking with them.
You think of Brad, you think of the reasons we started this little podcast now a while ago, and they were grounded in real life, but they were grounded because we just wanted a venue to hang out and talk about this stuff. But you take that up a real big notch, and you have the work of Greg and Shelly, because as was clear from what we just heard with them, they literally see D&D as a force for good in the world, a grossly underutilized force for good in the world. And the podcast, the book, and their other activities are largely about bringing that to a wider and wider audience. And that's pretty impressive. And again, like you said, I think you feel that vibe in what they say.
And I'm going to make a little bit longer point, and I'm going to background a little bit. What we had experienced in 2020 into 2021, and even as we continue to deal with the ramifications of the pandemic, there's nothing good about a pandemic.
No.
There was nothing good about people getting sick and ending up with long-term issues or passing away from it. But one of the things I did notice, obviously, and we all notice, and we've talked about it, is this distance that we had to create for ourselves resulted in us as a society in our own ways, finding ways to connect.
Yeah.
And one of the cool things I thought, ignoring the terribleness of the pandemic as much as, and I don't want to, that's a bad way of putting it.
Nope, you're not, but you're not minimizing it. Nope.
Is how people found ways to be creative and connect and do that with games.
Yes.
And especially with a game like D&D that is, and if you read the history of the different versions that are written by outside people, whether it's on Reddit or other these forums, a lot of them talk about how D&D is really such a bad way of saying it again, an open system and a way to be creative.
Yes.
And it made it easier for you and I to start doing some gaming, because then I could be a terrible DM as a starting DM. But it still was fun for us to do. And you'll hear us joke about that with your throwing axes and,
because
my
there's
DM prerogative.
A ton of source material and blatant approval and endorsement in the material. Do whatever the heck you want with this. Go off-road. It's all good.
And they've really, I have copies of earlier editions. You have, I think, the first edition.
I got the AD&D, when they re-released it. Yep. And
I knew I never played first or second, third, or fourth edition. We really didn't start playing. I played the original Red Box D&D before AD&D, and then we jumped back in. The material they produce, it's not just I look at like the older versions, and again, no knock on them. Monster Manual, Gadgets, and I'm just coming up. It's very standard names. Now they have Tasha's Cauldron of Everything.
Well, you were saying to me right before we started recording that you've been reading the Player's Handbook, and I quote, "for the first time is lit."
Yeah.
Right.
And we've talked about this as RPG materials literature. That's almost become like an underlying theme that comes up with us all the time, because obviously both of us have oversimplification and affinity for literature. And being able to use material that we like in an area that's of interest to us as recreation, as literature. I always had kind of done that in one form or another. That's why I had a collection of RPG material that never was used. It was just read. But I find that there's a lot of different RPGs out there, and we've talked with a lot of people from them that make good reading. And the D&D material, like Acquisitions Incorporated.
That is one of my absolute favorites.
Yeah.
And really, the
material is just a great read.
It is. It's so much fun. Okay, so speaking of a great read, before we wander over to the GM corner, we have the treasure hunt.
Yes,
you have a treasure
hunt.
So
the treasure hunt question, and I think you know the answer. We don't have anyone on who can guess. What is the answer to what got your attention? Not that anything else didn't, but what really caught your attention when we were talking and we talked to them about during the podcast?
Honestly?
Yeah, honestly.
I was really surprised it's about Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay, that was not what I was going to say. And you know full well I wasn't going. Nice try.
I continue to be rather taken by the fact that Welcome to Dragon Talk, the book, is being published by a university press.
And that's the correct answer.
Yep. That I just think that is so cool for multiple reasons.
Let me ask you, because obviously you are a professor, you are you have a doctorate, you are a writer. Do you think that a university press publishing like this offers yet another point on the idea that it's becoming more and more mainstream?
Yeah, like I said, like everyone heard in the interview chatting with Shelly and Greg, I think certainly the possibility is there. The fact that a university press is running this title suggests that suggests that this is a topic of discussion and of inquiry that is coming to be seen as increasingly legitimate for study. And we could have a whole discussion, even an argument, certainly a debate about whether that even matters. But just the fact that
let me
that's
interrupt.
happening, I think that's
the
pretty
idea
cool.
of research and study, in my opinion, not being in that field, I think there's legitimacy in doing that for anything.
Yes, agreed.
So I between you and I debating, there's no question about that, as far as I know. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted that just because I wanted it to be clear that you and I believe that, in I think very similar ways. There's good reason and need to study everything.
Absolutely everything, right? And I mean, I love that you bring this up, Brad. I have said to so many classes over the years, there's no such thing as a question that can't be answered. There's no such thing as a topic that can't be explored or studied. No question is ever off limits. Instead, the challenge is, do we have the technology to ask the question? Maybe that technology is a paper and pencil test. Maybe it's some kind of fancy, device in a particle collider. I mean, whatever it is, and everything in between. Answering questions about the cosmos is a matter of technology, not of the questions themselves. If we don't know how to ask the question, that's because we don't yet know how to ask the question. We'll get there. And so, like with Welcome to Dragon Talk, the book, the fact that it's been picked up by University Press is just neat, because again, I think there's the potential to spur on greater inquiry. There are, to my knowledge, 2 or 3 academic journals that focus on RPGs, and it's very, very niche. I mean, my research is pretty niche, but that stuff is really niche. Like I really had to go looking for them a while back. And when you see academic presses picking up books like this, running them, that just kind of says to a much broader range of people, of readers, of investigators, of scholars, hey, there's a way to get this out. And so that motivates more questions and more writing. I think that's great.
No, and that's what I'm always fascinated to hear your take on it, because I live outside that world. So I'm always fascinated, this in all seriousness, for me to get, you're my window into it. And the idea, we have connections with folks out on Twitter and all that who are psychologists.
Yep.
Who and we've talked with people about that.
Yep.
Related to using RPGs as a therapeutic tool and whatnot. So, and obviously we all know there's creativity, there's organizational, I can think of myself, having a master's in business, the ways that I could use RPGs, role playing and things, analog type gaming, as a tool in team building and anything else.
When you you look at Dr. Megan Connell, who you mentioned before, who's been on our podcast, and she has the first ever book coming out on RPG based therapy.
Yeah.
From an academic press, not a university press, but from a really credible, really significant academic press. I mean, this stuff is coming, right? It's only a matter of time until we can apply it to stuff like you were saying, like business. I mean, come on, wouldn't a corporate workshop be a lot more interesting if you were slaying dragons than talking about mission and vision?
Yeah. I can think of many ways on a daily basis where I feel like I have to slay a dragon, and
exactly.
I end up as a burnt cinder,
or play the bard.
Yeah, which I still would. I know we did a one shot with me as a bard, but that's still
I meant in real life. But
I failed as a bard in real life. I'm more. I don't even know what I would consider myself.
Look, I every time I think of Vox Machina, I think of you as a bard.
Yeah, that's unluckily for me, I don't have that type of skill set that
in any of those areas.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That's truly role playing for me, because it's like the exact opposite. So yeah, as we move to the GM corner, I am interested looking in the window as you and I continue to talk about this over time and continue to see the evolution of role-playing games, cosplay, whatever it is, as a tool to unite, as a tool for therapy, as a tool to rebuild those connections that we lost and are struggling to rebuild as part of the outset of the pandemic, as long as the pandemic stays away and we don't have this crazy XBB variant that everyone's talking about. So I think there is, obviously, just based off of reading the book and seeing the individuals that they talk with who have been guests on their show
and so profoundly affected by D&D.
Yeah. And it's not a, Greg talks about this, I believe, if I remember correctly, early on in the interview. It's not a game for the pocket protector, thick glass wearing crowd anymore. And it really never was.
Though they're still welcome.
Oh, sure. Everybody's well. I mean, but they weren't welcome, you and I wouldn't be talking about this, right?
This is true.
So sorry, I jump back in just because I think the academic potential, and that was the other thing I did allude to it. I didn't want to come across too harshly, is, I wondered if they had additional material they didn't use that could potentially be like a second book.
Fingers crossed.
And and obviously I didn't want to jump too far and minimize the importance of this book coming out.
No.
But having read it, I am anxious and ready for more. Should they decide to do that?
Yeah. All right. So let's wander over to the GM corner.
You kind of mentioned the player's handbook stuff, so I'll come back to that. But what's been on your desk, or what will be on your desk?
It's sort of on my desk. I am continuing. You and I have talked about this. I don't know if I brought this up in an episode. I don't know. I have been keeping my eye on Iron Sword Starforged. Just going to call it Starforged. I'm very intrigued by. I didn't come across it until well after the Kickstarter campaign, and so I missed all of that, and so I've been following the updates. I've discovered this week, with gratitude, that the makers, thank the maker. I've discovered that they have that they've put out on their website a number of free PDFs that give you some tools, including some cool world building stuff. What is it called here? It's on my desk. The Truths Workbook. Just everyone knows how much you and I love world building. And I'm just very intrigued by this game. It's a far future sci-fi kind of novel approach with a really interesting dice mechanic. We haven't talked dice mechanics lately, but
I was curious. I didn't want to go down a rabbit hole, but I was going to ask you, what does the dice mechanic look like to you?
So, okay, I've got to do this by memory, and I've only looked at a PDF a couple times, but so you have a D6 and Starforged people, if I get this wrong, I apologize. If you feel the need to send me a book to correct me for my education, I'll accept it. Subtle. Nice, yes.
Nice segue there.
Thank you. So, because I'll come back to the mechanics in a sec. Because I'm kind of chomping at the bit. I'm waiting for this book to become available. I really want to pick this up and read it. I think I want to play it too, but I really first want to read it. It looks so interesting. Mechanics wise, okay, so Brad, this is interesting to me. I'm ignoring a bunch of the other stuff, but the dice mechanic is clever. So you got a D6, and they've got two D10s. And you roll the two D10s side by side, basically on a check. And if when you roll the D6 against the set difficulty, you roll the D6 against the D10s. If your D6 comes out higher than either D10, it's essentially a weak success. if your D6 comes out higher than both D10s, so let's say you roll a 6 and each D10 is like a 4 and a 5, then it's a strong win. There's a narrative element here.
Yeah.
And it's really it's clever, it's efficient. As I've read their quick guide, I keep coming back to the Genesis narrative dice system, where this is essentially going after the same thing, but in a simplified form, in a little crunchier and much quicker form. Like I could see these rolls being really kind of fast and fun. So that's what's on my desk.
That's as it becomes available, obviously I tend to follow your lead with books in many ways.
Says the guy who has already ordered 2 books and 4 other ones on sale today.
Stop it. Actually, there's one more that I didn't mention that I forgot. So,
7.
Well, we'll get to that. But
we got free books today, but that's coming up after the Jam Corner.
Yeah, that's.
What's on your desk?
Well, I'll talk about, obviously I said that I've been, just for upcoming episodes, I needed to refresh myself. Like I said, I've been off the radar for a little while. So I've been working through Player's Handbook and DM Guide. You and I have talked about this on when we've text chatted and all that. I've been reading the resource documents, the actual, like, in effect.
Yeah, you've been sending me a bunch of links. Yeah.
And so I've been reading the under material behind it, and just
the
fascinating.
SRDs.
The SRDs. And I've really, with no disrespect to other games and all that, I've really had to kind of set them aside for the moment because of the stuff that's coming up in the next few episodes with us, where we're going to do some duetting type of work. And I've really, as much as there's stuff that I want to read that's outside of the high fantasy realm, that's where my focus is right now. So nice. I did order. It's arriving on Saturday. We've talked about this book before real briefly, but the Game Master's Book of Legendary Dragons.
Yeah.
And we're going to be talking with someone about that in the future, but I ordered the book.
Maybe.
And another person that has fascinated me for a while, and I've talked about it a while, is Matt David's books. And I have a number of his his thinner paperback about random tables and so on.
And I just ordered, I think you ordered it too, but I just ordered and actually read in basically one sitting his no prep RPG guide. Thank you.
Yeah, I have it. The No Prep Game Master: How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love Random Tables.
We haven't talked about that. You and I haven't even talked about that really yet. But that's its own discussion, which we'd love to have him on the podcast if we can get him.
If you're out there, we'd love to have you.
Yeah, we have
put him in the show notes, Jace. Maybe we can tag him.
There we go. Yeah. Well, okay. So I think maybe anything else on your desk?
That and
a lot on your desk.
This is going to be interesting. These came up a couple times by Silent Wave Press.
Okay.
And they have it's a like 3 books: Village Maps for the Game Master, Fantasy World Maps for the Game Master, and Dungeon Maps for the Game Master.
Interesting.
Very inexpensive little books that have more material.
Yeah.
And I'm, as part of world building, I can't collect enough of those.
Right.
So those were inexpensive. And then just the books that you and I have talked about for future episodes. But I want to go back just and mention real quick the other one that's been on my desk that I still am fascinated by. We had Gwen Marshall on.
Yeah.
And Ancestry and Culture, an alternative to race in 5e.
It's such a good little read. It really is.
It really is. And the ideas, we've talked about this before when she was on with us. I love the material. Absolutely love the material. I probably won't be able to implement it in time for our little gaming sessions we're going to be recording.
Yeah.
But
come on, Wizards. I mean, Dr. Gwen Marshall, she's already done the work. right?
Yeah.
Let's
It's
catch
really,
up, people.
it is probably one of the coolest, I don't want to use the word add-on, but coolest change maybe to
Well, in a no, in I mean in a good way. It's one of the best third party
yes
materials we've seen. That and yeah, I'll just yes, that. Of course, now I just looked over and saw Midnight Legacy of Darkness on my shelf, which I haven't picked up in months, and it's like, oh no, especially now that the Rings of Power just ended for season 1. It's like, oh man.
And I got it, of course. I've talked about the Ring, and I've also talked about Dune. Those are still sitting out there.
There's so much to cover.
But right now I had to find a way to focus myself. Otherwise, I would look like that guy in Scanners that had his head explode.
What you're saying is you can only buy 7 books in one day.
And yes, and ironically, as a side note to that, because this will end up coming up.
Okay.
We've always had this little humorous, not really wager bet. There's no wager, and you don't do betting, but to see which one of our spouses will actually listen to an episode or actually show up and speak a word on our podcast.
Yes.
So what I have found is I'm still thinking it might be your spouse that is more likely to show up than mine. But luckily for me, like today, I mentioned to her, I said, we're going to talk about that. One of the next episodes, we're going to talk about something that you and I got in the mail today.
Yeah.
And she goes, oh yeah, I know. I'm going to listen to it. And every time she does that, she smiles because she knows, because
that's just a bald-faced lie.
Oh yeah. That's just yes. But one of these days we'll have one of them say hi.
Yeah. One of these days we're going to trick both of our wives. I mean, we are going to invite them somehow onto the podcast.
I'm just thinking we're going to have to record the podcast using our phone, without them knowing about it, and
that might be illegal.
No,
not really.
We're married, so there's a legality to it all. But that being said, I'm going to stop talking because I have been all over the map
before
today.
anyone files that suit. So everybody, before we wrap for this episode, one
more thing. I'm really happy that you're back to do the outro, because it is a trademarked outro.
I thought you did a very good job last week.
Yeah, but I'm still happy that I can go on mute and I can let you wrap it up. So I go on mute.
All right, so this episode here today is the first of approximately a stretch of 5. Brad and I are going to be on a D&D kick for a while. We've been thinking about this for a long time. We've been warning you all that this was eventually going to happen again, just like in our first episodes. We were honored to have had Shelly and Greg on with us. Shelly again. We are not done yet. We have some pretty significant stuff coming up. But first, starting next week, Brad has been pushing to get me to do this for months. And when I say months, I mean it's probably a good 6 months, maybe more like 8 months. You've been on this, Brad, for a while.
And you're talking about the gaming? Because I'm furrowing my brow like I didn't know where you were going with this.
Yep. I am. Brad has been trying to convince me forever, it seems, to try our hand at a little actual play.
Well, let's clarify this, because I've talked about session zeros a lot.
Yep.
The gameplay piece, we both know there are some phenomenal podcasts out there that do that.
Yeah, they really
That's not going to be our shtick.
But you've wanted to try it.
But I thought it would be humorous for our listeners, all 5 of them.
Yep.
Plus Jim, and to actually, sorry, Jim, that's with great
TalkDragon.
But what's engage? Is to, because it's just a duet, it's just you and I.
Yep.
The humor we've had in a very poor, uneducated DM, and you as a uniquely charactered elf that sounds like Alan Rickman.
It has to be.
Actually bringing some of that to
So next
and,
week,
and so much is not so much the gameplay itself; it's the humor you're going to hear in us trying to do it. So
next week we're going to start some action. Don't worry, people. This is a short-term, short-lived, non-permanent thing. We've been talking about this for a while amongst ourselves. Next week we're going to do some actual play. We're going to, like Brad said, we're going to do a session 0. And then the plan is we're going to do a couple episodes of just briefly working ourselves, if not through, then into a duet-based adventure with Brad as our fearless and constantly underselling himself GM, who does a great job, especially with the world building. Man, wait until you see. And then me, with Brad's guidance and help, creating a new PC, so to speak, live on radio. So this will be a test for us, and we hope not a test for all of you.
Well, let's just clarify. If the next episode is an interview with someone, you'll know that it was an epic failure for us to record it.
Right. So I guess stay tuned for next week.
Yeah.
And as always, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for listening. Let's continue to use all these wonderful, varied games for better at home and in the world. Be well, stay well. We will see you next week.